going. Glenn, welcome to the program. This one, we are going to make a talk about the George Adamski photographic evidence, his photos, not so much the films. We may show a couple of film clips, but it will mainly be of his photographic evidence, of which there are plenty of photos. Everybody nowadays always talk about that they are lacking data, physical data, empirical data, which is not the reports of people, but are physical evidence, which is photograph and films. And one person who has a lot of physical evidence is George Adamski. And nobody really wants to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But we do, and they are quite convincing stuff. So, Glenn, this was a small introduction, and give your introduction to this, what we're going to talk about today.
Well, good morning, Renee. It's always a pleasure to be with you. We've looked forward to doing this particular program for a while.
By the way, Glenn, happy birthday. It has just passed the time that you are actually now 65 years old, is that?
That's
65?
correct, yes.
Yeah,
well, thank you
65
very
years
much.
old.
That's I'm glad I'm still, as my uncle used to say, upright.
Yeah.
And but more importantly, it also indicates another milestone. Over 60 years now,
Yeah.
I have had the privilege and honor of being included and immersed within this particular field of UFO studies, and to be the curator for all the Adamski material. There's quite some material written about George Adamski, and I can positively say that I'm probably the only living person who has about 80-85% of George Adamski's total story. Whatever you find out there in today's world or in past publications, whether it happens to be Lou Zinstag or Wendell Stevens or Colin Andrews or a host of these other people, they have written mostly their own opinions and suppositions. They had no or little to no facts about George at all. They were lucky to even have 10% of the real story. And so I think that it's still my responsibility to give the people the actual facts and the actual photographs and films. We on this YouTube channel, we have a previous program called the Adamski Films, where you can see that. Some we may be repeating here on this program in conjunction with the still photographs that we'll show. And so I make it a point to provide factual information about George, and not all this garbage that has been thrown around, mostly by people who haven't the slightest clue what they're talking about. I won't name actual names, but anybody can recognize them in today's UFO field. And the interesting thing is, while George insisted that his contacts were human beings from other worlds, and many others had these type of contacts as all, we had veered for a long time into the monster features, Halloween stories kind of aliens. And now I've noticed on programmings that they are going back to including the notion that some of these extraterrestrial visitors are also human beings as well. So they're trying to cover their bets by playing both sides of the field. And that way, that kind of tries to bolster their own reputations, because since they really don't know what they're talking about, they have to make sure that they coddle to the entire community so that they don't get ostracized from them.
Yeah.
So long story short, what we will be doing is we will be looking chronologically and historically at the George Adamski photographs that have covered a period of time of nearly 40 years, 30 some years, 3 decades. Now, you show me anybody in this UFO film who has consistent, authenticated photographs of extraterrestrial vehicles over that length of a period of time. And when we hear in today's media the fact that, we don't have enough data, or we don't have enough study, or we don't have this, or we don't have that. I don't believe it, because I'll tell you flat out, it's a bunch of bull. We have warehouses full of data, warehouses full of photographs confiscated by the military and the government.
Yeah.
And so much information that is not given privy to any of the so-called academic societies, whether they had been Project Blue Book, Anderson Commission, Condon Report, and all of that. They basically were hand-fed information that was carefully redacted and specifically censored in order to direct a certain type of negative, skeptical thinking, in order to totally suppress the subject.
Yeah.
Anyone who does a little bit of research from our beginning eras through this time has found that that policy worked then, and they have, since it worked, they have no compunction about using it again to work now.
No.
Because it, why give up a good thing if it works?
Yeah, exactly.
So we will take a good look at these photographs, and we'll do this in an overlaying camaraderie, companionship, because I will talk about some things, then you will take over and talk about some things. We may jointly discuss things as information and ideas come out as well. So we want to make this a very provocative and a very well thought out program, so that people will use those same features to think for themselves.
Yeah, that is what it will be. So Glenn, you will begin with sharing a screen and then maybe showing some of the early ones.
That's exactly what we've got here.
Yeah.
So this particular picture is a young picture of George Adamski.
Glenn, remember to maximize the photo, if you can just do that.
Let's see.
Right next to the X up in the right corner.
I got overlaying screens here. So
right next to this one, right? Yeah, that one. You should be able to maximize it.
Here we go.
That's the one, yes.
So the previous picture, in fact, was a very young George Adamski in the 1920s. And this particular photo was in the 1930s, when he was lecturing at the Green Hotel in the Glendale, Pasadena area. On a Tuesdays, I believe that was, he would hold these talks concerning philosophy, universal principle, the commonality of life, and many of the lessons that he had been privileged to learn during his 7 years in the very private scholastic foundation in the Far East, in Tibet. And so for 7 years, he was trained there, and eventually came back around the age of 15 here to the U.S. Shortly thereafter, he went into the U.S. Cavalry along the Mexican-American border. And one little notion that people aren't aware of is that his troop had been captured by the Mexican federales, and that they were in jail, and they were scheduled to be executed by firing squad the next day. And that night, Pancho Villa rode into town and liberated the town and liberated all the prisoners, including George. And then that was just part of his many stories of life. And I inherited his coin collection from the late Alice Wells, and in there are several silver Mexican Liberty dollars from the early 1900s that he had retained. And so that history is quite interesting.
Yeah, to say the least, yeah.
And so what happened is, in the mid-1930s, he opened a school in Laguna Beach, and one of his students, Lolita Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, awarded him with his first telescope. And that telescope was a 6-inch telescope. And you have to understand at that time, that was quite a significant and expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And this is the publicity photo that was taken by the LA Times. And it appeared in April 30th, 1938 in the Los Angeles Times, the article. And so George started his viewing with telescopic equipment of the skies. And in the late 30s, before they moved off to Valley Center in 1940 through 1945, he had taken several observations and photographs of ominous objects and had submitted them to the government in 1940, military actually, and they found them to be too obscure, not definitive enough. And we were on the verge of World War II. You know, our European allies were already in the war. And so there were other interests by our officials other than that at that time. But it shows that George's interest and his tracking of this subject already started at least in 1938 when he received that telescope.
Yeah.
And the interesting aftermath to that is that they moved to Valley Center, which is just to the west of Mount Palomar here in San Diego County, where the Hale Observatory is. And in the late 40s, in 1949, from October 14th for 7 days, there were photographs taken by the staff of the observatory of these ships in formation. And so I believe the observatory went up 47, 48, 49 for 1 week. These things flew around the observatory and were photographed and reported into Project Blue Book. We have that here, also the text of that. And that's also that text of that. And these photos are available in my new book, The UFO Reality, Can Truth Prevail, which is available in English. I have just negotiated 2 contracts in 2 European languages for the publishing, and we're working on 2 more on the Far East. So we hope to make that information available worldwide when we're given the opportunity. But
Yeah.
you can see by looking at these photos, and then you look at it, look at the dome shape. Look
You
at
can
the
zoom. You can zoom in, Glenn. You can just zoom in by
I
just scrolling the wheel, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Here
So
you can
that shows
definitely
you
see the
them
shape.
flying in formation, clearly dome saucer shaped, and the Project Blue Book report talks about the astronomers and the staff of that facility that were discussing the pictures and discussing the seeing of these items. And coincidentally, George Adamski also reported a cigar-shaped UFO over the same area, and that is included in the same time frame as this October of 49 around the Mount Palomar area. But when you look at it, you can see the magnificent clarity of these craft and their capabilities. And in fact, if we go back to this shot that shows the structure of the observatory, and you can see the sliding aperture here of the door, which allows the telescope to look out. And this entire dome sits on a gimbal that rotates 360 degrees, obviously, so that it can look in all directions. The astronomers said that when they opened it up and looked through the telescope, a large cigar-shaped craft, or mothership as we call it, parked itself right in the viewfinder of the telescope. And so the astronomers then activated the gimbal to rotate it in a different direction. And as they rotated it around, the mothership followed that around and parked itself in front of there again. So anybody who tells you that there's no evidence is in clear need of some professional help. And if we look here, you can see here, unclassified from Project Blue Book, And it talks about these observations, the names of the people involved, the circumstances upon which they have observed it. And at the very end, it talks about Adamski's uh, report as well. This has become unclassified in Europe several years ago. I have never seen this released in the United States of America.
Interesting.
So what George did is Mrs. Johnson's son was a doctor and an employee of Caltech. And Caltech, of course, is responsible for the Hale 200-inch observatory.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Johnson was responsible for going up to the top of Palomar and doing the surveying and measurement both of the sky and of the land in order to develop and to secure the proper location for this 200-inch telescope. And mind you, there are 3 other telescopes as well, I believe 50-inch and a 25-inch, several of them. And so it is a multifaceted facility. And so Dr. Johnson visited George and Valley Center at the end of 44 and said, listen, this new telescope is going up. I suggest you move closer to the mountain because there will be an increase of activity, not only from our extraterrestrial friends, but also of the scientists and laborers and academics and the regular people who are going to travel that road and construct the facility, and eventually those who are going to go and look through it. And so George did that. They sold the property in Valley Center and moved to the base of Mount Palomar to a property that became known as Palomar Gardens. So from 1945 till the end of 1954, in that location, George set up his 6-inch and 15-inch telescope with the Brownie camera adapter, as you can see, and started to take pictures through his telescope. This is a very old camera. You have to remember that these photographic equipment from that time was a fixed lens. There was no such thing as interchangeable lenses or telephoto lenses or things like that. You were lucky to be able to adjust the f-stop in order to facilitate a different light impact upon the film and the lens. And so it was, rudimentary equipment. I remember I had an old camera from my grandfather's era, an Agfa. That was the same thing. You pushed a button and a little accordion came kind of out, and then was on it a fixed lens. And you could set a few settings and you could take pictures, but everything was wide angle, long view.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get something close up, you had to get close up.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as zooming in.
No, you had to move your body and the camera closer.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so
let's just mention that the camera on that telescope was it was built to sit on that telescope, and it was an EHG Dresden Graffels cut film camera. So that is what he brought with him when he had to photograph.
That's right, and he also had a smaller tripod that was about the height of the base here of this telescope, in which the camera would bolt on and then could take pictures. Because once again, when you can't change f-stop and film speed, the movement of your hand or anything around you relative to that camera will quickly blur those pictures.
Exactly.
And it was quite an accomplishment, and he took dozens and dozens of pictures in order to get some decent ones that he felt were visible enough and discernible enough for the public and to the military and government, to whom he gave all free copies. Anybody who requested pictures from George got them without any type of payment. This cigar-shaped craft was taken during the 1950s with his 6-inch telescope. I included it in this particular frame setting because we had just talked about the Project Blue Book report from the October of 49 observatory event, in which he listed seeing a cigar-shaped craft, and so other cigar-shaped crafts were seen in that area, also reported in the newspaper. And and also were photographed. So that gives people an idea. Now, so that we clarify some misconceptions, because we got people out there claiming all kinds of stuff in their ignorance. Some people have said, well, here you can see windows. Those are not windows. That is a reflection of the sunlight and atmosphere against a metallic hull. And the differential is because in these areas, there is a magnetic band that rotates. And so if you have rudimentary physics knowledge or gyroscopic knowledge, if you rotate magnetic bands in opposite directions, and Mr. Tesla proved this quite convincingly, then along the length of the hull, this helps set up a pro-gravity field. There is no such thing as anti-gravity, no such thing as antimatter. There is no such thing as parallel universes, multiple dimensions. These are all figments of our sci-fi imagination. They work directly with nature, and it works so well that it takes them from planets to planets and star systems to star systems.
Yeah.
So
it's that simple.
it's that simple.
Yeah.
Now, here, this property is how Palomar Gardens looked when they had moved in and developed the property a little bit. What remains of it is just a cement base here of where the old cafe used to be. This cafe was put together by Alice Wells, not by George Adamski. George Adamski was not a hamburger or a hot dog cook or anything else other than a communal worker on a property where everybody helped.
Yeah.
One day he drove the tractor and the plow. The other day he might have cooked a few hot dogs and hamburgers. Well, you know, I've been flying airplanes for 45 years professionally, and I've had friends over and made a nice barbecue grill, and that didn't demean from my abilities to fly a jumbo jet all over the planet.
Yeah.
So these accusations, oh, well, he did this and he did this, that's what everybody does. You do that around your own house. You paint the awnings, you take care of the yard, and there was not any different. These wild innuendos and accusations thrown at George is just beyond rational thinking. If you take a moment to rationally think what they say, you know they're nothing but idiots. So this cafe went up. This was the idea also of the Johnsons, because there were no facilities on the mountain at that time, and people could stop and have a cup of coffee or donut or whatever. And because it was a quite lengthy drive during those days, a 2-lane highway out to the country. Today, where I live in Vista, that drive is probably a little over an hour. In those days, probably at least an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So, and here you see a picture of the inside, and there sits George in the corner, happy as a clam. And many people came and would stop, scientists would stop, and they would sit and have discussions and look at the photographs that George had taken and compare them to the ones that they too had taken. Yeah. And the environment was quite illustrious at that time. Warm in the summer, sometimes a good snow in the winter. And so it was not easy living. It was a lot of work, and these people were not all that particular young at those ages and times. I included this picture just because I happen to like it. George had such a huge affinity for animals. I remember my mother once saying, don't worry about people. If the animals like you, that's all you need to have. That's good enough.
Yeah.
So
then you should have a good life, because if they accept you, everybody else should have also as well.
That's right. And you can see the terrain in the back and the trees and the property. And so it was definitely a rural area. This picture was taken for Time magazine, also at the same location. And so they did an article on George, not too flattering, but like George said, sometimes bad press is as good as good press.
Yeah.
So with his telescope, he took a number of pictures. These are called a mothership or cigar-shaped craft or a carrier craft. And that is actually a much more apt name. This device is capable of going to the oceans just as easily as it is through space. You can see two of the saucers de-energize as they're approaching the hull to land and then go down the airlock inside. These devices can range from a length of several thousand feet to 20 miles long. When we did our investigation of the moon, my father and myself and my family, we used a 12.5-inch telescope to watch on the crater Aristocrats, which was 50 miles in circumference. Three of these crafts parked parallel and one perpendicular that almost reached from crater end to crater end, so conservatively 30 miles long.
Yeah.
These are traveling cities in space. They are fully integrated and acclimatized to take a population over lengthy periods of times into the far distances of space, explore new scientific wonders, meet new civilizations, and interact with them peacefully. And so this gives you an idea of the type of crafts that were orbiting our planet at this time. There are some in the UFO field that say, well, these were Nazi constructs, and I just have to laugh hysterically that how do you get the materials into space, several trillion tons of materials into space to construct one of these craft in the hostile environment space by a bunch of whack job Nazis. I mean, for anybody to believe that has got to be totally separated from reality. They must be just so saturated with internet that they cannot look back into actually history itself and determine some reality.
And perhaps just use common logic, because is it possible at this time? Or then no.
Yeah, of course not. We
Not
couldn't do it now, let alone then.
No.
I mean, we've got a Boeing capsule stuck to the ISS.
Yeah.
And with today's technology, we are just infants, let alone then.
Yeah.
This particular cigar-shaped craft is a smaller one, maybe several thousand feet long, maybe 3,000-4,000 feet. These craft are the saucer crafts. Once they exit and energize their magnetic fields and propulsion system, then they become encapsulated by that field. That field is a byproduct of the electromagnetic energy. And secondly, it extends around the ship at various lengths and sizes as far as around it. And it is a version of a force field, because the more power that it exhibits and the faster it travels, the further that field extends from the ship to protect it from meteorites and cosmic dust and all the anomalies that are in space. Because if you're traveling at these tens of thousands of miles per second, it only takes a pea to punch right through your whole hull and through the other side if you just had a bare hull like we have, and not a protective envelope around the spacecraft itself. And normally, the cigar-shaped craft also is enveloped in that field, but in order to release and receive the scout crafts, it has to nullify its field, because they are positive fields, and like everything in nature, only positive and negative attract in a natural environment. And that holds all of creation together, down to the molecules, the elements, the atoms, the subatomics, the quarks. It's all positive and negative. If you have two positive charges, it repels each other. That is just a fact, whether people like to accept it or not, whether that's in scientific or in personal descriptions. Here's some moonshots, early moonshots at the George Tick in the late 40s, early 50s. You can see these crafts maneuvering around the moon. And interesting enough, when we produced our book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon, in 1981, my father released it, and in 97, I revised it and re-released it. You can see NASA photographs where they show that we have taken photographs of the same type of crafts, not only between the Earth orbit, the voyage between Earth and Moon, and around the Moon and on the Moon itself. So we can see these photos show these craft quite clearly and have shown them for a long, long time. And I defy any UFO personality, any, to disparage these shots, because
Yeah.
all they would be doing is exposing their own ignorance.
Yeah. Like I said in the beginning, these are empirical data. They are not skewed by any person's background or who took them. These you can study neutrally without any opinion in advance. So that is how you can treat photographic evidence, and that
Not
is
only
important.
that, yes, not only that, but George never developed his own photographs and
Exactly.
glass plates and negatives. Everything was taken down to Carlsbad to a photo lab owned by a fellow by the name of Detweiler,
Yeah.
and he gave multiple depositions stating that none of these photographs were tampered with in any way.
Yeah. I will
So,
show that affidavit a little bit later.
yeah. Here's a close-up of the same thing.
Yeah.
So you can clearly see that the objects are, in tandem, but they are not an optical reflection because of the formation of how they are accumulated there on the picture.
Exactly.
So this one, Renee and I just found in archives as we were preparing for the show. It's a very old picture. You can just see the moon. It's blurred, but you can see this whole litany of crafts in formation, in fleet, flying past the moon. And then there are some other photos as well. Here's one of these craft traveling through space.
Could perhaps be from the same series. Maybe.
It could be. It could be.
Yeah.
And you can see that they're in motion because since you have a fixed f-stop on the camera, anything that moves will leave a trail behind it.
Yeah.
So some of them do and some don't, but it shows you a fleet of these crafts in motion. Here's even a better one of a cigar-shaped craft in motion between the moon and the Earth. And
nice, yeah.
And then this one here too, we kind of enjoy because it shows in the deep space two of these crafts with the well-energized magnetic field around it as it travels through space. This is how you travel space. You don't build a bare hull and you don't shove it through space by our archaic concepts of propulsion. That will never get you anywhere. This particular propulsion system creates a field within where the ship is like its own planet. There is no sensation of motion. There is always one gravity pulling towards the floor. And that's whether this thing is right side up, upside down, or sideways. It always pulls to the floor. So you are comfortable within it in a one gravity situation where everything is always relative to the floor as you would normal be, just like you are on the Earth. If you're on the Earth in South America, obviously you're beyond the curvature of the equator and you're standing on the ground and you're not standing upside down. You're standing with your feet on the ground with one gravity pulling you to the ground, never the wiser of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the basic gravitational principles are so simple. And the space people once said that a 10-year-old could understand the principle. It might take a little bit more to be able to build it, but to understand the principle itself is very simple.
Yeah, gravity pulls you to the center of the object you are in.
That's correct.
That's it.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And you can see here that this is the carrier craft with the field around it. And you would say that the craft itself is probably 1/3 the size of the field inside. And the carrier craft is like a thermos bottle. It's built with multiple hulls, typically 3 hulls. And so the inside hull then becomes the comfortable environment upon which the people and the animals live, and travel space and just a fine method and thinking. And then there are androids and robots who go outside those hulls and work on any mechanical situations or problems that may come about, because they will not endanger human life, unlike us, where we find human life so worthless that we throw it away at a moment's notice. We actually value robotic life above human life. We've got robots I've seen recently in many programs so sophisticated and built that you would think that we would take those robots and we would make them into firefighters and into workers in dangerous zones where we do not have to endanger human life. But in this world, we don't care about human life. We find that excessive. We have more than we know what to do with, and $1 million robot is actually worth more than any person. So our entire value system is totally messed up.
Yeah.
You can see here Cigar craft, really large in comparison to the moon, and a series of other crafts that are traveling with it. Not much different than when we send out a carrier system. You know, we send out the aircraft carrier, the destroyers and cruisers that go with it, and they travel in a fleet kind of condition.
Yeah. Corvettes or whatever around it, yeah, just to support it. Yeah, support craft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Show me one single UFO personality that has any authentic photographs that are like this. Here's a picture of George.
This is unique. This is unique.
Yeah. Here's a picture of George with his tripod that you had mentioned earlier, Renee, with the Browning there mounted on it. This is also the one that he took, and the stand that he took to Desert Center, which you will be covering and talking about the photographs that were taken there on November 20th, 1952, of the famous contact that was reported by the media and recorded by the military as well.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to include his 15-inch telescope. He upgraded and built a larger telescope and took even better pictures. And so you can say that this man was no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. No. He was extremely serious and responsible for what he represented. This property is right adjacent to the Palomar Gardens, which they sold in December of 1954 and moved right next door, literally, and this became known as Palomar Terrace. And this facility still exists there today, of course, by different owners, but these two properties, Palomar Gardens and Palomar Terrace, are still there. There he is with his motion picture camera, and he took unprecedented motion picture films over Vista, Wisconsin, Boston, Mexico, New Zealand. I mean, Silver Springs, yes, absolutely. And so consequently, he was more than a prolific figure in this field. Here's a picture from that era as well. He was doing media promo for one of the magazines. You can see a list of some of the same pictures you just saw, and as part of the advertising picture. And so there was a number of articles done on him. And since you also mentioned physical evidence, if you look in the 1953 on our website, there's a Spanish article that was conducted by, I believe, from Mexico media group. And George had collected a piece of metal from one of the scout ships that was being repaired. And the spaceman laughed at him and said, "Well, what do you want that for?" He says, "Well, because I live in a skeptical society where people don't believe it, even if they're in front of their own eyes." So he retained those pieces of metal, and it is exposed in that particular article But the follow-up to that story is George gave pieces of that metal to Dr. Wilbert Smith, who was the Canadian director of Project Magnet that had to do with the investigation into UFOs as well. And as we know from the Canadians, and especially lately the Canadian minister, and that's been a few years now, but he openly went on the air and said, absolutely, there are visitors to this world and this planet. And of course, that makes always our elected officials quite nervous.
Unfortunately, unfortunately he mentioned that there were also reptilians visiting and so on. So he got off on a different tangent later, which
well,
was not so lucky.
I believe that oftentimes people succumb to the pressures that are projected at them and said, well, you made this statement, but if you include some of this, then we find it more acceptable, and we won't persecute you so much, and what have you. Yeah, I've heard the likes.
But his first statement was that there were human-looking extraterrestrial visiting Earth.
Yeah.
So, exactly.
This particular photo was taken by the 6-inch telescope. You can see the ocular of the telescope, the black part of the tube. You can see a light energy field given off by the top coming through the hull, radiating from the hull itself, and then you can see the dome of the bell-shaped
interesting shot, actually.
It's a very, very interesting shot.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that before or after.
And the interesting thing is that George's films and photographs have gone through every decade's full of analysis. In the 50s, with orthographic projection by Leonard Cramp, and also biometric radiation tests to determine that the photographs also had the objects had radiation signatures to it, so they couldn't be models. And then they went through a series of tests in the 60s as well. In fact, there was a standing challenge that if anybody could prove these photos to be fake, they would be a $5,000 reward. Not only were there no takers, but there was no one who was willing to accept the challenge on top of it. So it is
this photo actually also showing the graying effect of an object at a distance, at a great distance.
That's right.
Yeah, you can actually see it when you look at that disturbance on top of the craft. You can actually see the graying effect.
I suggest everybody go to our website, Adamski Foundation, oneword.com, and you will see in there a section about George Adamski, in which you will find the breakdown of all the people who examined the pictures. Producers John Ford, famous Hollywood producer, said this can only be an object of the equivocal size of about 35 feet in diameter. And to be able to suspend that on a crane in a distance would be impossible by their technology. Secondly, the next expert said the graying effect, as Renee mentioned, that comes from, which is uneven, from a picture through a telescope cannot be faked. Remember,
you can see the atmosphere between the ocular and the object. You can see it's the graying happens when an object is at a distance, a long distance.
That's right, and it's not always a continuum. There are different variations to it. And so they said that it is impossible to fake that. The model company experts said absolutely these were not models. And so the litany goes down and down and down. It says that they were never water coolers, never chicken breeders, never Coleman lanterns. And we've proven all of that by systematic mathematic measurements and display on the website in collateral to these pictures themselves. And yet not one of these slanderous critics has taken away their statement. They're the first to blow through their mouth, but they're the last to step forward like a man and say, well, I supposed wrong.
Yeah.
This is an interesting shot because it shows one of the newer type craft that is more lenticular in shape, and so
Quite interesting.
quite interesting. I think
Yeah.
Renee has had a number of sightings of these type of craft in recent times, but he was not aware that already in the 1950s there
Nope.
were,
I was
uh,
not.
these type of craft. But George was very clear. He said the bell-shaped craft is an old shaped craft. It is their Model T, like our Model T Ford.
Yeah.
And this is only used in the planetary atmosphere. It is not meant or able to travel in space. It has to go on the carrier craft.
Yeah.
There are 3-ball condensers in which the electromagnetic charge is shifted, which helps it to move sideways and back and forth and whatever. This particular area down here is a lens. And if you open the lens, like an iris of a camera, it opens like a flower, then the people that are sitting inside can look straight through the floor, a highly magnifying lens, and from space or any altitude can look down on the ground and observe the people and everything that goes on with the same optical clarity as our current spy satellites have, that can be in orbit and take a picture of you walking on the street holding a pack of cigarettes in your hand, and you can see what make and model they are. That's why some of these craft, when the field has to be nullified around the bottom, and when they nullify the field and open the lens, it looks like a donut. It looks like a hole in which you can look straight through.
Yeah.
And so that's why some of these crafts have the optical representation of a wheel within a wheel, because there are 3 electromagnetic bands underneath this flange that rotate one way and the other way. That is part of the progravitic field. There are also 2 up here, and in sequence with the magnetic pole that runs through here, this is part of their early space travel uh, vehicle.
Yeah.
And so the newer one is the lenticular or elliptical, which does not require a carrier craft to take it from planet to planet. It is capable of deep space maneuvering. And so that picture we just saw, and this one was one in the part of a series that was taken, because anybody who knows anything about photography knows there was no such thing as motor drives. You just couldn't hold down a button and take, 20 frames per second. You had to push that button continually with your finger. And what happened is when you took a picture, you had to call what's called panning, moving the camera and taking the pictures in order to get enough sequential shots that hopefully some of them would be viable, would be presentable. And this is one here of the next sequence that was here. This is not a ring. I've heard some bozos lately say, oh, well, look, there's a ring on top. No, it is a sphere on top, and the light is reflecting against the side of the sphere. It's not a loop ring. It's a solid ball sphere. So once again, the magnetic rings that rotate around the top, you can see some of them here on the bottom, and it gives you a very good representation. These are not landing gear. The craft never touches the ground. If it comes down to land, due to its magnetic properties, it will always hover when it is at a 0 propulsion state. It will hover about a foot, between a foot and 2 feet above the ground. It's like cushion, a magnetic cushion, like two magnets, positive, positive. It holds that magnetic cushion between them, and then the door slides open, and then you walk in and out. And so, but once again, these are part of the propulsion system. They do not need landing gear.
Glenn, remember that I will talk in more detail about these photos.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
you are coming up here very shortly.
Just take it easy.
Uh,
But one will always get carried away when you show
yeah,
really good photos. So yeah.
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 Well,
Yeah.
it's some things what I can say and some things which I can or won't say.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, this was once an unpublished photo. We have released it here for quite a number of years now. Taken through the 6-inch telescope, you can see the blackness of the tube, the opening of the ocular. But the amazing thing is, of course, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Authentic scout ships have 3 sets of 4 portholes. Not 3 portholes, 4. And I've seen several people in the UFO field promote photographs that have 3 portholes, and I start laughing right away because I know it's fake, because that's not how the construction is. The mathematics and the constructions are based upon universal mathematics, where 1 and 1 equals 3, not 2, because 1 and 1 produces something, and that production is the third item. And so 3, 6, 9, and so on is how the craft's mathematics work. This type of craft is 33 feet in diameter. The next is 66. The largest one of the scout ships is 99, and then they transition into a different model. Some laboratories have looked at this closely, and they think that there are faces reflecting behind these portholes. But you can see that it gives off an energy field, it gives off an energy distortion. Impossible to be a model. Impossible.
Yeah.
And so these type of pictures put the nail into the critic's coffin, and they're extremely unhappy about that, but it makes me very happy because I like to stick it to them sometimes. Anyway, Renee will talk about the circumstances that happened in with the famous contact with the extraterrestrial named Orthon, which was not his name. That was the name George gave him. The translation of Orthon means noble one. But that person asked for one of the glass plates in George's pocket from his camera and motioned towards it. George gave it to him. When the craft left, 3 weeks later, it flew low level over the Palomar Gardens property. And you can see the distortion of the magnetic field around it. You can just see some of the portholes, 3-ball condensers, and the large black ocular on the bottom of it. A hatch open, a package dropped off, and when George unwrapped it, it had the glass plate that he had given the space traveler, and on that glass plate were these symbols carved. And when you look at these symbols, which are ancient language, and you do one thing better and compare it to the symbols that were discovered by Marcel Homé in the Brazilian jungle in 1963, almost 10 years later, 10, 11 years later, you will see there is a more than an 80% similarity, direct similarity in the symbols. The symbols that Professor Homé, who was I believe, a Belgian anthropologist, very famous for his discovery work in the Amazonian jungle, in this particular case at the Piedra Pintada. And you will note that these symbols were dated optimistically between 10 and 30,000 years old. And they contain the message formula of how to produce free energy propulsion, or free energy for all our systems and our planetary needs. So this material, these so-called mysteries, and nothing's a mystery. The only mystery is when you're ignorant of how it is actually working.
Yeah.
So it reveals the reality of the type of information that we have been given since we have been visited by these same space people for tens and thousands of years. And that's not to preclude that there are not also human beings from other solar systems and other faraway star systems that come our way occasionally too. And so, but it shows you exactly that we have been given information. And I know for a fact that yes, we have recovered alien technology. Yes, we have reversed engineered it into some of the things like Colonel Corso talked about, night vision spectrometry, and to some degree, I would think microwave projection and acoustical wave projection, and a whole host of open door to new science variations. We often get into a rut. It's like aerodynamics. We will never be able to perfect a different form of travel because we are constantly locked into the mindset of aerodynamics. And I'm well versed in this, obviously, since I have a degree and also have practiced it for 40 years flying all the time, and so professionally. And so when you can only look as far as you have to have a wing, it has to have a certain camber to it or thickness and a certain shape to produce a high and low pressure gradient to create lift and to work with the center of pressure and the center of lift and center of gravity. We have boxed ourselves in to ultra perfecting one particular method, and we never think outside that method and go to the next logical step. And so that is also a great restraint to our ability to progress and to make the next progressive and successful reaches into space. And so,
can you stop sharing?
Yep. And so that
Just
that is my little bit. And so we will let Rene have his time.
Okay, Glenn, thank you for that long history about Adamski and his early photographs, which are so interesting. There was a lot of photos that I don't think the general public has ever seen, maybe, or even know about, and I find that very interesting. It leads us up to his first official contact in the desert with the 6 witnesses, which was Lucy McGinnis, Alice Wells, the 2 Baileys, Al Bailey and his wife Betty, and George Hunt Williamson and his wife Betty. Funny enough, they were both called Betty at that time. But those were the 6 witnesses to the first official contact of George Adamski near Desert Center. They somehow drove. I think the Baileys and the Hunt Williamsons came from Phoenix, and they met up in a town close to the Desert Center turnoff. And of course, Adamski and the 2 ladies came from Palomar Gardens. So they met up there, and they drove towards a little bit north of Desert Center, I think about 10 miles. And then they had an early lunch. And let me show you the first picture of that lunch, actually, where they are actually pictures taken by, I think it was Betty, the George Hunt Williamson wife. And they were actually having a lunch at that time. Forget about all the circles, but this is actually where they were sitting and having a little snack and lunch, where they had parked the car at the side of the road and then just collected their things, and I think they ate a light lunch. And this is actually Alice Wells, and this is Lucy McGinnis, this is Al Bailey, and this is George Adamski standing here. And this is a photo that Michael Haseman, one researcher from Germany, or is it Switzerland? I can't remember if he's from Germany or Switzerland, Glenn.
Germany,
yeah. And this is when I received a scanned photo of Michael Haseman photo, I found some interesting stuff on the sky already at the time when they had lunch. This is definitely a large carrier craft, and the ones in red are the ones that I found was not part of any dirt in the photograph. So these red markings are the ones I tried to enhance. And actually, Michael Haseman was asked, since he has the original negative and print, we asked him if he could identify those 6 lights in the original, and he could. He confirmed that they were in the print and the negative, so they were not kind of dirt, because dirt turns out gray or dark. The lights are there. So they are actually real things in that photo. So let's go to the next one. I then darkened the photo to bring out the light points just to see if they were interesting. And they were. It's still a carrier craft, I think, and some smaller, perhaps registering discs, monitoring the situation at the time. They were preparing for something. So the next photo, I cleaned it up a little bit. There was still some dirt, and this is the one that were cleaned for the dirt. So what we see is 1 point here, 1 point there, and the carrier craft. And that was about 15 minutes before they saw the actual carrier craft in the sky. So they were not aware of it in this photo. Even Betty, who took the photo, did not report that she saw something. So it must have been very obscure in the viewfinder anyway. So that was the first photo where something in the sky was seen on that day, on the 20th of November, 1952. When at some point, yeah, you can add something, Glenn, if you want to.
Do you have the color photo of that same?
No, I just wanted to keep it authentic, so it's only the originals.
Yeah, because the color photo shows it even clearer.
Yeah, I know, but that does something to your eyes when you see it in color. So, but I think that the black and white is actually quite good enough.
Okay.
It shows things, but a little point later, after the lunch, Adamski got a hunch that he had to go back a little ways back from where they came, because there was a good location that he maybe be able to set up his telescope and maybe take some photos of if any spacecraft was coming his way. So when he asked Lucy McGinnis to drive him and Al Bailey back a certain way to help him set up the stuff, this was the first photograph he took when they had got out of the car. And this is actually a photo that is not mentioned in Flying Saucers Have Landed. He did not mention that this was his first shot with the Brownie camera, but it is. The shadows are almost directly below the bushes, which you can see here. So the time must have been around 12 o'clock or just after 12 o'clock. The sun was right above it. And what you can see here is actually quite a lot of things. At that time, they had the mothership in sight, or the large carrier craft in sight. They could see it when they approached the place. So I enhanced this photo, and this was the carrier craft that they could see, this large object, which we also saw in the previous photo. And what I enhanced was that there were maybe some probes or this looks definitely like a real craft. It has a structure to it. But the two other lights up here could just be probes, maybe. On the other side of the sky, there are two lights over here. These are also not dirt, but actual lights in the sky, in the negative. So what these were, these could also be monitoring crafts or probes, smaller probes.
Correct. Yeah.
Remotely controlled, maybe. And there is something behind this hill or crest, which I have never been able to really get close to what that could be. I have made a comparison with a new photo from 2000 taken by Glenn, which does not show that there's anything there. So on the day, something must have been there. What it was, I have no idea. That is just beyond me. So what I did with this photo was to try to see if anything else could be located in that photo, maybe on the ground, to prove that this was the first photo. And what I found was that Adamski's telescope was not in place, but it was set up. There were some boxes here, and Al Bailey was actually pointing to the sky. So this is actually quite an interesting photo. I believe Adamski was over here, and he was still picking up some pieces for his telescope, which was actually some piece for his Brownie was down in the corner here. So maybe this was on the roof. Maybe he used the camera to lean on to take this photo on the top of the car, maybe.
Yes.
Yes. Since this is very close to the camera, it must have been quite close to where he was standing. It is not on the ground. It must be up on something. What it is, I don't know. But it is the part.
Well,
I think
it looks like the tripod for the Browning camera that we showed earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is. But this was just a few enhancements, and I just circled in where the interesting things were.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, the same thing, I think, and without the circles, just so you get an idea. Some years ago, I sent the same photo to be enhanced or maybe looked at a Swedish photographer. And he came up with this indication of what I sent him. Can you see that he has located the 5 lights in the sky? He has.
Yes. Yeah.
So he saw the same thing. He did not look at the ground, which I did not ask him to do. I just say, can you see something in the sky that is out of place? And he found those 5 lights, which tells me that he saw the same thing that I have found.
Right. Interestingly, he did not wish to go on record with this revelation or evaluation.
That's interesting. I also sent this photo to a Russian photography friend I had, but he never replied back. And I have actually communicated with him, but he had never replied back to my emails. So I think he maybe got shut up. Somebody told him not to do something with this photo. And that's many years ago. That was in 2017, when I actually met him personally in Copenhagen for a photo shoot with his wife. But he never touched that photo, even though I sent it to him and asked repeatedly for his results. He never came back. He just cut off communication, and that was this was a comparison of that thing in the behind the hill, the light thing which I could not identify.
Right. And
I made a little drawing and said it could maybe be this part of some craft that has landed that we see, but I don't know. And this is Glenn's photo many years later, in 2001 or 2000, which shows the same part, and there's nothing there.
Right.
So on the day, that thing, there must have been something there. That is definite proof. This is data that people are asking for. This is actual data. You can compare a new modern photo with an old one, and there is a difference in what appears in a static hill. So something must be there in real life.
Yes.
That's undeniable. So that is data for people to have in their hands. This was the first frame, which he never talked about. It is not in flying saucers have landed, but his second photo is in flying saucers have landed, and he describes how he took it. Let me just read a little part of it. No, let's go back. He took some after this photo, he took some photos with his telescope. Suddenly, a small craft, he got a hold on a small craft in the sky, which came down and landed, or not landed, but hovered behind a crest, just behind the hill. And this was an enhancement I did with the original to the left, a very blurry photo, which shows the 3-ball landing gear here, the underpart of the craft, and the cabin on top. You cannot really see the top of the craft too well because it's blurred. But I tried to enhance it as much as I could without touching the foreground, only the craft, and the 3-ball which is used to maneuver the craft is visible. Right. And the upper part of the craft is visible, glinting in the sun. You can actually see it over here. And the sun is also hitting the side of the cabin.
Yes.
This is undeniable. Actual data again, which people can argue about till to the end of times, but it's data. It's verifiable data. This is actually a photo that Glenn took recently out in the area. I will not talk about that just now. But this was actually some of the photos. He took 7 photos with his telescope in rapid succession, as fast as he could. When you think about the telescope set up with a camera on the telescope, you can imagine that it was quite nerve-wracking when he saw that craft hanging over the crest. He didn't know how long it would be there, and he did not know how much time he had. So he had to be quick, and that is probably why he did not focus correctly. He did not look at the plate so he could see if he was in focus. I think he just shot them as fast as he could. Actually, there is a little description in the Flying Saucers Have Landed on page 193, where he said, as I removed, he said, quickly I spotted the craft in the finder of my telescope, and as rapidly as possible, I snapped the 7 loaded films without taking time to focus through the ground glass in the back of the camera. So that confirms that he did not check if he was in focus. But I was hoping and praying all the time that Lady Luck was with me and that the pictures would turn out well. Well, they turned out so well that I could actually enhance it, so it's pretty good. And if you see it a little bit smaller actually than it is here, it actually looks a little bit better to the left. It looks quite sharp if you can see it, this small picture.
Yeah.
It looks quite good. And this is what it looked like for itself, right? So it is a little bit blurred, I would say. Had he focused, I think it would have looked something like this. So, but this was the first Brownie photo, sorry, the second Brownie, no, before the Brownie photo, sorry. That was through the telescope. A little while later, when he had shot those photos, the object moved a little bit away. But before it moved away, he pulled out the Brownie photo and took one shot with the craft hanging over the hill. This is actually the craft hanging there. I can remember in the old days, people thought that it was only the upper cabin that we could see. But actually, this is the whole craft that you can see, almost the whole craft. And I tried to enhance it and zoomed in on it. And this was actually what could be seen. Some part of the craft is obscured because it is a different angle than when he had his telescope on it. So, but it was still hanging there. So I find that a little bit interesting, and this was just the craft in itself. But as you can compare it to the telescope photo, it is a little bit different angle because his telescope was set up closer to the part over here. So
Right.
He saw the object somewhere over in the left corner here.
Yes.
But when he used the Brownie, he was a little bit over from this angle instead. So he
Right.
saw it in a different angle. So that was Brownie frame 2. When he took another photo a little bit later, when the object had moved away and he could not see it again, so he thought it had maybe gone back to the mother craft. That was his estimation of the thing. He took just he moved over to the side where he had his telescope and took this photo of the same area where the object had been. It was over here. But there was nothing interesting in this photo. I have looked at this photo ad nauseum for many, many months, and I have not been able to locate anything here.
Yeah.
But the next photo, the 4th he took with his Brownie, is very interesting. That was just before. He says also about the Brownie photos in the book, he decided to take a couple of more pictures with the Brownie just to show the general terrain in this section in case my spacecraft pictures did not turn out well. So he questioned whether or not they would be okay, the telescope pictures. So he took a 4th image just before something happened. And this was the original photo that he took. There is something, I can remember that when Glenn sent me these pictures way back in 2001, I could remember seeing something here that looked out of place. This is, I'm quite sure, almost the same thing that we see behind that hill, which is glinting on the first frame. It's the top of a craft, and I think this is the cabin. It cannot be anything else. It is so out of place in this image. It doesn't look like anything else in this terrain. And down here, there is a definite figure standing here.
Yes.
This is the head. This is a body. Some of the body behind some kind of hill. And this caught my attention, and I thought, I have to do something about that. So these two things I concentrated on most about this, because this was a couple of minutes before Adamski had his contact, which was witnessed by 6 other people. So I tried to zoom in and make it very large just to get some details I could work with. This became even more apparent that this was the top of the craft, or a little part of the craft you could see. And this was definitely a person.
Yes.
It couldn't be anything else. It's so out of place of the rest of the terrain. And I made this one very much zoomed in of the person, and this was what I got. This is definitely a person.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think the craft is still also glinting in the sun, so there's a structure here, and he's very close to that craft, so that it all seems to fit somehow. And I can read the passage after this photo was taken, which I have no idea if Adamski was aware of, showed something. I think he was.
Oh, yes, he was.
Yeah, he just didn't describe it in the book. He says here, after taking 3 pictures with the Brownie, which he claims is only 3, and I know it's 4, but the first one I think he just didn't think of as in connection with the actual sighting of the craft. So he said, I just took 3 pictures. He was somewhat awed by being so close to a saucer, which he saw on the telescope, and with the Brownie. And I wondered if whatever or whoever was in it knew I was photographing it. I had a feeling that they did. I only wished I could have seen the one who was operating that beautiful craft and could have had a chance to talk to him. Remember that he says him. How does he know that when he has not met the person yet? Maybe he would let me inside. Just think about what he states. And then he says, suddenly my reverie was broken as my attention was called to a man standing at the entrance of the ravine between 2 low hills about a quarter of a mile away. He was motioning me to get closer. And just for comparison, the distance in this photograph is about a quarter of a mile, he states. And I took a photo. I got my brother to take a photo of myself at the same distance with a good camera in color. And this is what I look like at about a quarter of a mile distance with it's a good optics, modern camera taken in 2018.
Yes.
So, but this is the details you can bear out. You can still see I'm a person. Maybe you could not recognize me, but you can see this is a face and this is a body waving.
Yes.
And I think this is what Orson did when that photo was taken, where he just stands and look and to try to get contact with Adamski. And then I think he waved him over. And I think this is actually the motion that he did, which Adamski describes in his book. He did not photograph it. I don't know why he did not. He had the Brownie in his hand. He should have done, but he didn't. I would have done, but he didn't.
You have to remember the circumstances and the time and location.
Exactly.
People in those eras were not snap happy as they are now.
I know. Yeah. But it was a momentous situation, and he could have, but I understand the situation perhaps overwhelmed him, which I can understand. But I think it just describes the amount of detail you actually can get out of a photo if you just enhance it in the right way.
Yes.
And what it actually does is, if you know a little bit about Photoshop, you can put on filters, and you don't change the actual photo, but you just enhance part of what is your attention is taken to.
Right.
So these were actually quite interesting pictures that he took with the Brownie, which was actually maybe not his best camera that he ever had, but it worked fine for the day. It is quite interesting. I just want to show some newer photos which Glenn took in 2001 of the actual area that we just saw, the black and white. So this is what it looks if you pan right. This is what it looks like. This was where the alien stood by the back of the hill. If you zoom into this was actually around here.
Yep.
And this was where they had the conversation and where the craft was in the background here. During a later time when he actually talked to the guy. And this was actually where the light was in the sky, where the light could be seen in the first frame. So these are all based on Glenn's actual place photos from the deserts, from the actual contact site. Which
and
was
if I can add to that, one of the additional YouTube videos on the channel, in which you will be viewing this, it has to do with revisiting Desert Center, and you will see photographs that were taken probably 3 years ago, very clear high definition photographs. It basically gives you a tour from the freeway all the way to the Desert Center location and the walk up to the contact area.
Yeah, it gives you an idea from this part, and then you fly in over this area, and it goes up in the air, and you can actually see the contact spots, which is down there.
So we have both a ground view and a drone view as well, and so you were able to see a significant amount of quality photographs and video.
Yeah, and you can actually see the terrain much better when you see it with the drone. It is actually quite nice. I like that very much. But yeah, that's available on your website anyway, Glenn. But this is also just I just plotted in where the different people were during the Adamski had his conversation with Orthon, which he called Orthon, which was not his real name. But that was what people could see, and Alice Wells was actually the person that was closest to the contact during the contact, and she looked at them with binoculars, and she made a sketch as well.
That's correct.
So what happened?
Do me a favor and send me that picture, please.
Yeah, this one is actually quite nice. Yeah. So I will. I have quite a few different ones from also before we got the drone Photoshop, we can see different things from from Google Maps, actually, just of the area, which is actually quite nice to have different views. You could also see how desolate the place was, and maybe even more so down in the 1950s. So, but different areas of the area. You can see it's a very desolate area. A dried up riverbed and so on. So it's
called the Coxcomb Mountains.
Yeah, the Coxcomb Mountains, that's right. But but these were the Brownie photos. So I will just this was just to round those up, and that was actually up to the physical contact, in which Adamski talked to the person that he named Orthon, which was not his real name. But there was a purpose for him using different names for different persons that he had contact with. But that was the Brownie photos and the first contact.